A marriage collapsing under ego, betrayal, and quiet calculation erupts into a corporate war when a husband long underestimated finally reveals his power, pulling threads Karen never noticed until the entire empire she claimed as hers begins to fall piece by surgical piece. She slammed her bag down so hard the handle snapped off. "You embarrassed Daniel in front of the entire team," she barked, standing in the middle of our kitchen like a prosecutor, not a wife. "You will apologize to him for humiliating him at the company I built." I was plating dinner. Lemon rosemary chicken, her favorite, which felt almost pathetic in retrospect. I'd marinated it overnight, slow roasted it at 250, even had the asparagus charred just right, but she didn't see the food, didn't smell the thyme butter melting on the counter. All she saw was her own pride bruised, wearing Daniel's cologne. She meant it, the company she built. Never mind the 3 years I spent living on gas station coffee and unpaid invoices before we signed our first client. Never mind the equity transfer I handed her when I thought we were a team. Never mind that the office she now lords over sits on a parcel of land I purchased from my uncle quietly before zoning laws changed. Daniel, her colleague, the same Daniel who'd been tagging her in office memes with winks for months, who accidentally left a pen in our guest room, who called me buddy at company functions and once whispered after too many drinks, "Man, you're so lucky to have someone like Karen. Real leaders are rare." I wiped my hands calmly, looked at her still in her stilettos, arms crossed like she was prepping for a closing argument. "Okay," I said. Just that. One word. Flat. No sarcasm, no heat, just a quiet acknowledgement. She blinked, not expecting it. No defense, no raised voice. She tilted her head, smirked. "That's it. Okay." I nodded, and returned to slicing the chicken. She took that as submission, as defeat. But what she didn't know, what Daniel didn't know, was that I'd stopped trying to win arguments in this house a long time ago. I wasn't interested in battles anymore. I was preparing the terrain. And in war, the quiet ones aren't the ones you should pity. They're the ones you should fear. Because sometimes the sharpest knives don't swing. They wait. They sharpen. And when they move, it's surgical. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're listening, consider subscribing. I know most don't, but it actually helps the team keep doing what we do. Quiet revenge tastes better when it's shared. Back to Karen. She finished her tantrum, poured herself a glass of my whiskey, the 16-year I keep hidden behind the vitamins, and muttered something about babysitting egos. Then she retreated to her office, heels clicking like a metronome of disdain. I stood in the kitchen alone, staring at 2 plates. One for a man cooking dinner, one for a woman plotting her exit. I didn't follow her. I didn't argue. I didn't even feel angry, if I'm being honest. Anger implies surprise, but I've been watching the cracks form for years now. And Karen had become bold in the way people get when they think consequences are optional. When they think their new toy is shinier than the thing they once begged for. She never asked why Daniel was at that meeting last week. She never considered how he ended up sitting next to someone I used to work with, someone I mentored quietly long before Karen knew how to spell procurement. She didn't notice the way I paused when she mentioned the merger pitch Daniel aced. She certainly didn't think I'd recognize the partner's name or that I'd know off the top of my head who Daniel shouldn't be talking to. Karen forgot the part where I used to be her before I stepped back, before I gave her the wheel, before I let her call it her company. But it will only turns if something else is powering it. And I built the damn engine. So I loaded the dishwasher, checked the locks, and walked into my study. Opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside, 3 manila folders yellowing a bit. Tabs still neat. One labeled Equity Agreement. Another Board Votes. The third Pinehurst Consulting Confidential. I smiled. Sometimes the best apology is timing. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. Not because of rage. Rage is noisy. This was something colder. A pressure behind the eyes. The kind of stillness that creeps in once you finally accept that someone you trusted isn't confused or lost or slipping. No. They're exactly who they've decided to be. And they think you're too slow, too kind, or too blind to stop them. So, while Karen dozed off to some podcast about female leadership in the age of legacy bias, I was in my study with a legal pad, 3 black pens, and a print out of the original incorporation agreement from 2004. Page 14, subsection D, voting rights in the case of fiduciary compromise. Karen never read this part. She skimmed the early sections when I gave her co-founder status. She liked the phrases like equal equity interest and executive authority, but she skipped the real meat, the quiet traps, especially the clause that automatically triggered internal review if a board vote linked a non-cleared partner into a competitive advisory interaction. Fancy language for you can't let your boy toy pitch to clients tied to rival firms. And Pinhair's Capital, Daniel's golden goose. It sat on a trust portfolio I helped assemble a decade ago before Karen even knew what a bridge round was. The trust had my name on it, sealed inside a shell that linked back to something called Sycamore Holdings. Sound boring? That's the point. No one looks at roots. They're too busy staring at fruit. At 6:12 a.m., I made a call to a man named Curtis Hahn. Tall, understated, and allergic to small talk. Also, Daniel's direct superior. Curtis worked at one of the parent firms Daniel had recently started cozying up to, unaware that the man he thought he was impressing was about to find out just how deeply he'd screwed up. Curtis answered on the second ring. "Russell," he said, voice low. "Been a while." "It has. You still on Pinehurst advisory rotation?" There was a pause. He picked up what I was laying down. "I am," he replied. "You want to sit down?" "Private office. No assistants." "I'll bring lunch." That was all he needed to hear. By noon, the meeting was arranged. Neutral ground, a small office I still leased under an LLC buried 3 layers deep. Karen had no idea it existed. That was intentional. She came down for breakfast that morning wearing one of those silk blouses she buys in bulk now, poured herself almond milk, asked if I was feeling better in that insincere HR voice she uses when she's winning. "Much better," I replied, slicing into a pear like it was the most important thing in the world. She smiled. Thought it meant I'd accepted the new terms of our unspoken agreement. Her rise. My retreat. Daniel's presence. "You should call Daniel," she said, stirring her coffee. "He was pretty shaken up, but he'd appreciate a grown-up apology." I'll take care of it," I said. She kissed my cheek like a queen patting a loyal subject, then left. That afternoon, I walked into the meeting with Curtis. He'd already pulled some reports. I handed over the file labeled Whistleback. Inside 3 things: a timeline of Daniel's involvement in advisory-level interactions with Pinehurst, a signature of Karen approving one of the cross-firm presentations, and a copy of the 2016 advisory vote with both of their names linked under the same strategic memo. Curtis flipped through the pages slowly. His brow furrowed more with each sheet. "You're saying he was never cleared for this?" "He wasn't, and Karen knew it." His mouth tightened. "And why now?" I leaned back. "Because I'm done pretending I don't see it. And because the people they've started dancing with, they've been my clients far longer than they've been Karen's stepping stones." Curtis didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. He stood up, extended a hand. "We'll handle it from here." And just like that, the first piece moved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for justice. I just handed over the right folder to the right man at the right time. And the beautiful thing about systems built on vanity is they never check the plumbing. They only care if the lights are on. They had no idea. I still held the blueprint. The office was intentionally nondescript. Frosted glass, no signage, tucked between a specialty tax firm and a failing interior design agency. One of those places you walk past every day but never wonder about. Perfect for quiet meetings with loud consequences. Richard Whitlow arrived right on time. Mid-50s, custom-tailored everything with that twitchy awareness of a man used to juggling billion-dollar decisions before lunch. He didn't bother with small talk when he saw me, just nodded once and stepped in. He paused briefly to assess the space. Spartan, soundproofed, a picture of water on the table, no assistants, no digital equipment, just 2 chairs, a legal pad, and a red file folder. I gestured to the seat across from mine. "Appreciate you making the time," I said. "I assumed this wasn't social," he replied, settling in. "Correct." I slid the folder across the table. He opened it. First page, a timeline. Daniel's email headers, timestamps, recipients, clients, places he should not have been with, people he was never cleared to talk to. Richard's brow furrowed. Second page, Karen's name in digital ink, granting Daniel discretionary authority over outreach in the Pinehurst advisory campaign. "Jesus," Richard muttered. He wasn't even on the clearance list for that portfolio. I said nothing. Let the weight of that sentence hang in the room like smoke. He kept reading. Third page, internal HR notes from a compliance intern who raised concerns about Daniel's overreach. The summary had been buried, but it was there along with screenshots of Slack messages between Daniel and Karen. Messages that started professional and ended with a suspicious string of dinner plans, compliments, and oddly convenient alignments of business needs and personal favors. Fourth page, the non-disclosure clause. Daniel's signature, ironclad, and directly violated. Richard leaned back, visibly paler. This can't be real." "Oh, it's real," I said. "And it's not even the worst of it, but it's enough to begin." He closed the folder slowly, his jaw working. "How long have you had this?" "Long enough to decide whether I wanted to burn them both or let them burn themselves." He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. Just nodded grimly, processing the way only men who've seen reputations crumble in a single quarter can process. Calculations in his eyes. Risk assessments unfolding like a spreadsheet behind his pupils. Finally, he spoke. "Why bring this to me?" I folded my hands. "Because Daniel's career doesn't end with a shouting match in a conference room. It ends quietly with a compliance audit with revoked access, with people like you deciding it's not worth defending a mid-tier strategist with no discretion and poor taste in co-conspirators." He exhaled and Karen the first shrugged. She'll figure out soon enough that her name only opens doors because mine is etched into the foundation. Silence again. Richard stood. You understand? I'll need to validate this. Of course, you'll find everything is documented, verified. Chain of custody intact. He nodded again. Slower this time. Anything else I should know? I tapped the folder. That's volume 1. There's a second one, but I'll only bring it out if they push. He stared at me for a moment. Not with fear, not with judgment. Just quiet respect. The kind men share when they recognize someone who doesn't scream or threaten, just executes. He extended his hand. Understood. We shook. And just like that, Daniel's boss walked out of that office a different man than the one who'd entered. A little quieter, a little more cautious, a lot more aware of who was sitting at the table. I didn't need fireworks. I didn't want drama. I just wanted the first domino to fall quietly. Let the sound come later when they realized who pushed it. Tuesday started with a smile on Karen's face and a mimosa in her hand. She was still glowing from the news the night before. A formal letter congratulating her on her expanded strategic oversight role across 2 new client verticals. A title boost, a bigger desk, 2 additional junior analysts reporting directly to her. The kind of meaningless power shuffle corporations hand out to keep sharks circling each other instead of upper management. She thought it was a win. Daniel brought over caissons to celebrate. I watched from the kitchen while he kissed her cheek, called her boss lady, and poured orange juice like he'd earned any of this. They left. They didn't look at me. I don't think they even saw me anymore. It was the arrogance that got me, not the betrayal. Betrayal is human, predictable. But the smug confidence of 2 people who thought they were dancing above the surface while the ice cracked under their feet, that was something else. At 9:14 a.m., Daniel tried to badge into the upper floor for his weekly planning sync with the Global Partnerships team. The scanner flashed red. He tried again. Red. He glanced around, shrugged, and knocked on the glass. The receptionist buzzed him in, assuming the reader was glitching again. It happens sometimes after system-wide updates, but what Daniel didn't know, and what Karen wouldn't bother to ask, is that no updates had been pushed that week. His badge had been quietly downgraded. Downstairs in the legal compliance wing, Richard Whitlow sat across from a lean, hawkeye-eyed woman named Andrea Sloan, Director of Internal Ethics and Audit. He didn't offer her coffee. Instead, he opened the folder I gave him and slid it across the desk. She read silently for 7 minutes, then looked up. Does Karen know? Not yet. And Daniel? Not even close. She nodded once. We'll begin quietly. Access logs first. Client interactions. Cross-check communications with Pinehurst Conflict Database. Discretion? Richard asked. Andrea gave a thin smile. Always. At 11:37 a.m., Daniel's access to the internal pitch tracking tool was restricted. He chalked it up to admin error. He pinged it. They said they'd look into it. At 10:04 p.m., he tried to submit a planning doc for Karen's review. The submission bounced. Permissions issue. He frowned. Forwarded to Karen manually. She replied with a casual, weird. Must be it again. You know how they are. She didn't know. She had no idea. She spent the rest of the day basking in her promotion. Took a lunch selfie with Daniel, captioned it, "Power couple in business and brunch." Even tagged the firm's location like she wanted the world to know what she'd built, what she controlled. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Andrea was already digging. She'd pulled Karen's digital signature log from 2016. Found the memo, found the vote, found the name Daniel, assigned to tasks he should have never touched. At 3:42 p.m., a quiet hold was placed on Daniel's corporate credit card. At 4:18, a temporary audit tag was added to his internal employee profile. Nothing flashy, nothing visible, just a change in classification that required any communication he sent to be backed up off-site for compliance review. By 5 p.m., the ball was rolling faster than either of them could imagine. And Karen. She came home late, wine in hand, laughing to herself about how someone in operations accidentally sent 2 of her reports the wrong memo. I swear sometimes I feel like I'm the only adult in that building, she said. I was sitting in the den, book open, listening. She didn't notice the way I looked at her. Not pity, not anger, just observation. The way you might watch a candle flicker right before it snuffs itself out. She curled up next to me. I think this is going to be a turning point, she said. A new chapter. You'll see. I nodded. Yes, I think so too. Because Karen believed the story was moving forward. She didn't realize it had already started ending. The dinner was hosted in one of those high-ceiling private clubhouses downtown. Dim lighting, polished wood, and enough scotch in the room to erase entire audits from memory. Karen called it a strategic mingle. Daniel called it an opportunity to level up. I called it something else entirely necessary. They walked in like royalty. Karen in a dark green dress she usually saved for keynotes. Daniel in a blazer he couldn't quite afford with a grin far too large for someone who'd been locked out of 2 systems earlier that day. He still hadn't figured it out. That's the thing about guys like Daniel. They think momentum is immunity. The room was filled with faces I knew. Men and women I'd shared war stories with before Karen ever learned how to read a cash flow sheet. Some nodded when they saw me. Others gave that polite double-take, unsure if they should acknowledge me with Karen now holding the executive reins. But Richard walked in 10 minutes after them and made a straight line toward me. We didn't shake hands. Didn't need to. Just a quiet nod as he joined me near the back corner of the room where the staff kept refreshing the aged bourbon and the real conversations happened. From across the ballroom, Daniel froze mid-sentence. I saw it happen. He was laughing with two junior partners when his eyes found me, then drifted slowly, confused to Richard standing beside me, talking, nodding, listening. His face drained like a sink with a pulled plug. Karen didn't notice at first. She was busy charming a VP from Celdron Tech, gesturing dramatically with a wineglass in hand, like a TED Talk in progress, but Daniel leaned over and whispered something. She glanced toward me. Her smile twitched. She pulled Daniel aside, I imagine, and asked him what was wrong. And if I had to guess, the conversation went something like this. Why didn't you tell me your husband was involved with the advisory board? To which she likely laughed that familiar, condescending laugh, the one she saves for people she thinks are insecure. He's not, she said. He left all that behind. Trust me. Only now. Her voice cracked on the trust me because even she wasn't entirely sure anymore. Richard and I kept our discussion brief. He updated me. The audit had begun. Andrea had found enough to justify full internal review. Daniel's access would be quietly severed over the next 48 hours. And Karen, she doesn't know yet, Richard said, swirling his drink. Let her enjoy the evening. I said she's earned it. We parted without a handshake. Later that night, after the valet pulled around their car, Karen and Daniel rode home in silence. He didn't touch her thigh, didn't make flirty jokes about hotel suites or midnight strategy sessions. He just stared at his phone, refreshing his calendar. And the next morning, at precisely 7:06 a.m., it happened. His project dashboard disappeared. His calendar, once stacked with client touchpoints and planning meetings, now showed blank, not empty, erased as if he never existed in the system. A red notification blinked. Access revoked. Contact administrator. He called Karen in a panic. She was midway through her morning run. Ignored the first call, answered the second. What? They took me off everything. My project access is gone. What the hell is going on? She snorted. That's not funny. I'm not joking. He snapped. Relax. It is probably just cleaning out old permissions. You're still new to this side of the portfolio. I'm not new anymore, Karen. Then he said it again. Quieter. Why didn't you tell me your husband was on the advisory board? And this time she didn't laugh. She slowed down. Stop jogging. I told you, she said out of breath. He walked away from all of that. Then why did I see him talking with Richard like they'd worked together for years? No answer. Just her own heavy breathing. Because Karen finally realized something. The man she mocked at home was no longer in the audience. He was in the room. And Daniel, he wasn't even on the guest list anymore. The envelope was waiting on her desk like a loaded weapon. Thick, unbranded, official. No postage, no courier tag, which meant someone had hand-delivered it, which meant whoever sent it wanted her to feel it. Karen noticed it immediately when she returned from lunch, still riding high from a congratulatory email sent earlier that morning by the regional director. Subject line, excited to see your leadership in this next phase. The irony would hit later. She sliced the envelope open with her acrylic nail, pulled out a single sheet with Richard's letterhead embossed at the top. Her eyes scanned it once, then again. Then her hand stopped shaking just long enough to steady the second document attached behind the letter. It was a PDF printout. Screenshots at least 10. Text messages between her and Daniel. Some professional. Most not. Let's get dinner. Just us after the pitch. You deserve it. Love how you take charge. The team listens to you like a goddess. Lowell. We can loop you into Pinehurst if we massage the voting memo. I'll handle the optics. Each one damning. And below it all, Richard's closing sentence in clean, unassuming Times New Roman. As per our ethical disclosure policy, your correspondence with Mr. Hale is now subject to an internal review for potential conflicts of interest and violations of fiduciary conduct. You are not required to respond at this stage, but any additional documentation may be submitted to compliance directly. Karen didn't speak. She stood up, walked past her assistant without making eye contact and left the office without logging out of her terminal. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. A woman she vaguely recognized tried to make small talk. Something about iced coffee. Karen didn't hear a word. By the time she reached the car, her hands were shaking again. Not with confusion, not even with fear, with rage. A boiling, skin-crawling fury that pulsed behind her temples. She burst through the front door of the house like a firebomb. He was in the kitchen again. Same place, Same posture. Calm, reading something at the island like it was any other Wednesday. She slapped the envelope on the counter. You did this. He didn't even look up. Afternoon, he said, flipping a page in his book. Don't play with me, Russell. Don't act like this is some coincidence. This is your doing. He closed the book gently, placed it beside the sink, then turned. I attended one meeting. That's all. Her breath caught for a second. The casual delivery. The surgical calm. It infuriated her more than yelling ever could have. You know exactly what this means. They're going after me now. Not just Daniel. He nodded once. They're protecting the firm. It's what companies do when exposure becomes a liability. Don't give me your management seminar crap. She exploded. You set this up. You knew how they'd interpret those messages. You planned that meeting. You manipulated everything. I didn't send those messages, Karen. That one landed like a brick through glass. She stood there, breath short, mascara already smudging under her lower lash line. You're sabotaging my career, she said, voice low now, shaky. You're burning everything down. No, he said. You lit the match a long time ago. I just moved the kindling. She sank into one of the bar stools, gripping the edge of the countertop like it was the only thing keeping her from sliding into the abyss. He poured himself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not scotch, water. Because there's a discipline in watching someone unravel without flinching. In staying stone cold sober as the storm you prepared slowly rips through the house they thought they built alone. She watched him drink it, watched him walk past her with quiet, measured steps, and for the first time in years, Karen didn't have a comeback. She had questions, doubts, a rising dread that this wasn't just a bump in the road, but a premeditated trap she'd been walking toward for months. And worst of all, she couldn't prove any of it because the messages were real, the votes were real, the memo was real. She just didn't know how many more were coming. Thursday morning, the house was so quiet it almost felt abandoned. Karen hadn't gone into work. Not after the envelope, not after the messages. She called it a mental health day on the company Slack. Told her assistant to hold all non-critical communication. Translation: hide. She paced the hallway like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Her laptop sat unopened on the kitchen counter, her phone face down on the island. Every buzz made her flinch. She ignored most of them. Daniel HR, one of the junior analysts, asking if the Thursday meeting was still on. She didn't know what to say to any of them. And then it rang. Not a text, not an email, a call. She turned it over, froze. Richard Witt, she answered on the third ring. No greeting. Karen, Richard said, voice low, calm, practiced. He just left my office. No need to ask who he was. Her throat tightened. She said nothing. He handed me a memo. Richard continued. Board vote from 2016. Your signature on it. Still silence. You know what that means, right? She swallowed. Something caught in her chest. It felt like her whole rib cage caved inward. I don't understand how he cut her off. It shows you knew that Daniel wasn't cleared for cross-partnership involvement, that he was listed on a red flag file and that you looped him in any way. Karen sat down hard on the edge of the sofa. Her knees buckled just like that. That memo that was years ago, she whispered, voice thin. That doesn't matter, Richard said. The softness gone. What matters is that it wasn't redacted. It wasn't overwritten, and it's dated with your approval. It connects you directly to a breach. She blinked. Her hands shook. You think I planned any of this? You think I knew? Heat. This isn't about what you knew or didn't know. It's about what you signed and what you did after that signature. Her mind raced. That memo, was it the one she rushed through before the conference in Miami? The one Daniel said he'd handle? She never even read the full text, just skimmed for keywords. She thought it was a vendor sign-off. You have to believe me, she said. It wasn't malicious. I didn't even think it was. I'm not the one you'll need to convince. A pause, then quieter. Karen, we go back a long way. I've seen people survive worse, but if this escalates, I can't protect you. Richard click. He hung up. Karen sat there still holding the phone to her ear long after the line went dead. Like maybe if she held it long enough, the voice would come back. Tell her it was all a mistake, that she could fix it. But no second call came. Across the room, the television was still playing on mute. Some cable show where a real estate agent was smiling too wide at a couple touring a house that didn't belong to them. She stared at it like it was speaking directly to her because that house, that career, that board seat, they didn't belong to her either. Not anymore. Upstairs, I stood at the top of the landing, out of sight. I hadn't said a word since Tuesday. I didn't need to. The call said it all. She never once asked me how I had that memo. She never once asked why I'd saved it. And she still hadn't realized this wasn't damage control. This was the reckoning, and it was just beginning. Friday morning, the calendar notification arrived with no warning, no subject line fluff, just 4 words. Closed session. Executive Board location 19th floor. Glass conference room time 9 a.m. Attendees all. No assistance in small gray print beneath it, almost like an afterthought. Legal counsel recommended. Karen stared at it for a full minute before the weight of the subtext crushed down on her chest. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. She just sat frozen, her coffee cooling beside her, her fingers trembling slightly over the trackpad. And then, as if waking from a trance, she scrambled, called Lisa, her attorney, told her to clear her morning. Now, not 10. Now, she didn't even change clothes. Just threw on a blazer over a silk blouse she'd worn the day before. Hair still damp. She didn't have time to overthink her lipstick. The car ride was silent. Lisa didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The words closed session and boardroom told her everything she needed to know. The elevator ride to the 19th floor felt like an ascension to execution. She entered the room. All 12 board members were already seated. No smiles, no greetings, just silence. Richard sat 3 seats from the head of the table, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. Andrea Sloan was also present, arms folded, a closed manila folder on the table in front of her. There was one empty seat, hers. Karen took it slowly. Lisa sat beside her. The chairman, gay-haired and built like an oak beam, cleared his throat and clicked the remote. A screen lit up behind him. One slide, a scan memo. Date, August 16, 2016. Author Karen Westmore. Subject cross-firm engagement authorization, strategic initiative, integration, and beneath that in bold Daniel Hale, assigned to support Pinehurst Advisory. Then the chairman's voice cold and deliberate, "I'll be brief." Karen opened her mouth but he raised a hand, not aggressive, just absolute. "This isn't a hearing," he said. "This is a courtesy." Another click. Second slide. Screenshots of the text exchanges. Karen and Daniel, flirtatious at first, then strategic, then plainly negligent. "I never," she began, voice dry and barely audible. "You authorized involvement from an employee who wasn't cleared," Andrea cut in. "You also failed to disclose a personal relationship that may have materially impacted that decision." "I didn't think it was material. He wasn't even." "You signed off on this memo," Richard interrupted, tapping his pen against the table once. "You knew Daniel had been flagged previously for inappropriate engagement on the Mendoza file. You looped him in anyway. That makes this a pattern, Karen, not an accident." The chairman leaned forward now. "No vote will be taken today. We've elected to extend you a window." Her breath hitched. "You'll have 48 hours to tender your resignation. After that, we proceed to formal removal." Karen gripped the edge of the table. Lisa reached for her arm. "Wait," she whispered. "You're saying now? Just like that?" The chairman stood. "This isn't sudden. You just weren't paying attention." Silence fell again. Then one final click. The screen turned off. Chairs shuffled. No one made eye contact with her. One by one, the board members filed out. Even Richard. Even Andrea. Not a single nod of sympathy. Just the methodical departure of people who'd already closed the door behind her in their minds. Karen sat motionless. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Lisa finally pulled her up by the elbow, whispering, "Let's go. We'll talk downstairs." Karen's heels echoed too loudly in the hallway. She hated that sound. Too sharp, too final. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in and caught her own reflection in the mirrored panel. Wild-eyed, pale, shoulders hunched under the weight of her own name. Because for the first time in her career, Karen Westmore wasn't a name that opened rooms. It was a liability on a memo. A ticking clock. 48 hours and counting. The knock didn't come. The doorbell didn't ring. There was no one at the gate. But Karen jumped at every sound that night anyway. The refrigerator hum startled her. The ice machine made her flinch. She checked her phone 17 times, expecting, hoping for something from Richard or Lisa or the board. Anything that hinted this was reversible, salvageable, that her entire professional life wasn't teetering on a resignation letter drafted in the Notes app. She hadn't yet had the courage to send. Instead, it was Daniel who called. 8:44 p.m. She hesitated when she saw his name flash across the screen. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but curiosity and desperation won. "Daniel," she answered quickly. "I'm glad you used me." His voice was slurred. Tired, angry. The kind of tone that only comes after 3 fingers of cheap bourbon and a growing suspicion you were the pawn, not the partner. "I trusted you," he went on, voice rising. "You said this was airtight, that you had it covered. Now I'm getting emails from HR with words like disciplinary review and code of conduct breach." Karen paced the kitchen, one hand on her forehead. "Daniel, listen to me." "No, you listen. I had a good thing going before you dragged me into this political hell. I was making progress, building relationships, and now Richard won't even return my texts." "You think this was my plan?" she snapped. "You think I wanted this to blow up in our faces? I didn't forge that memo. I didn't report us to compliance. You know who did this?" "He did. Your husband," Daniel scoffed. "He's a ghost, Karen. I thought he was some washed-up founder who let you take over. Now he's got half the board in his back pocket and your name under a microscope." She stopped pacing. Her mouth opened, but no words came. "You set me up to fail," he said. "Lower now." And I was too stupid to see it. "Daniel, no. Please." Click. Call ended. She stood there staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her makeup was still mostly intact from the board meeting earlier, but something about her eyes was different now. Feral. Empty. The sharp angles of her cheekbones looked like accusations. She didn't sit down. She didn't cry. She dialed another number. It rang twice, then voicemail. She tried again. "Same. So," she texted. "Just one word. Talk." Nothing. A minute later, the screen lit up with a single reply from her husband. "I said, I'd apologize. I never said to whom." No punctuation, no warmth, no opening. Just the kind of sentence that doesn't need to raise its voice to rip someone apart. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't respond. What was there to say? Daniel had turned on her. The board was watching. Legal was circling. And the one man who used to say, "We'll get through it," now wouldn't even say her name. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that follows a cave-in, the kind of silence that doesn't forgive. She walked back upstairs slowly, past the framed degrees on the wall, past the glass case with the executive award she'd won in 2019, past the closed office door of the man who once built the empire she thought she was leading. Karen stood in her own home, surrounded by the illusion of control she used to believe in, and she finally understood. She wasn't being pushed out. She had already been erased. Saturday morning began with an unusual quiet. No alerts, no news, no damage control threads from the comms team. Just stillness, the kind that suggests something has already happened, something final, and the world hasn't caught up to it yet. Karen sat at her desk, robes cinched loosely, staring at the document in front of her. For words hovered like a guillotine at the top of the page. Voluntary resignation effective immediately. Her name was typed below it. All that remained was a signature, and it was already there in her own careful handwriting in the night before after 3 hours of pacing and a full bottle of Merlot. She hadn't slept. She hadn't cried. Not because she wasn't devastated, but because she didn't know how anymore. It was like someone had unplugged the emotional power grid inside her. The phone rang. Caller ID, Richard Whitlow. She didn't want to answer, but she did. "Linda," he said. Voice strained raw. Karen flinched. He never called her that. Not once in the 9 years they'd worked together. Always Karen. Always formal. But now using her middle name, it wasn't familiarity. It was disbelief. "Please tell me you didn't lie to me about your husband." Her throat closed. She couldn't speak. He sighed, heavy and hollow. "He just left my office again." Quiet, polite, but direct. She clutched the phone tighter. "He brought a document. One I've never seen before. Not even an internal archives. A joint filing from 2004. Early-stage grant structuring legal framework language that mirrors the clauses our compliance department still uses today." A pause. He was one of the original grant architects. Karen the advisory clauses, the cross-partnership rules, the disclosures. He wrote them. Her knees went weak. "Richard wasn't finished. That memo you signed in 2016. It referenced provisions your husband authored 12 years earlier. Provisions that still hold full board authority under legacy protocol. Do you understand what that means?" Karen whispered, barely audible. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Richard replied. "You should have then called her. We can't protect you and neither can Daniel." She sat back in her chair, eyes wide, vacant. No protests, no bargaining because there was nothing left to say. She glanced again at the resignation letter. Her signature gleamed faintly in the morning light. Richard's voice softened for the first and last time. "You could have told me who he really was. You should have, but instead you lied to everyone, including yourself." Click. The call ended. Karen didn't move. The phone slipped from her hand and landed softly on the carpet. On the desk beside her, the cursor on her laptop blinked at the top of an unsent email draft. A message to HR she had typed out a dozen times. Rewarded, reconsidered, rewritten, now pointless. Because the final word had already been spoken, she looked around her office. The framed photos, the plaque from the Women in Strategy Gala, the crystal decanter filled with untouched scotch, all of it suddenly looked borrowed, temporary, decorative. Because now she saw it, none of it had ever really been hers. It was all built on borrowed power, on names she didn't bother to understand, on signatures she didn't think mattered, on the assumption that those who came before her were forgotten. But some architects don't build for glory. They build to last. She stood up, folded the resignation letter carefully, slid it into the envelope already addressed to the board, and as she walked it to the mailbox barefoot in the cold morning air, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply dropped it in. Because collapse, when it's final, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be complete.